Small talk is a special thing. After many years of traveling the world and interacting with a great many clients from different cultural backgrounds, I have come to find that the art of making small talk is a very unique skill. In my experience, some cultures simply do not have this style of communication when dealing with business or when interacting in a professional setting. I've had business cards thrust into my hand without so much as a hello. I've also had products pitched to me as a form of introduction. And I've also had negotiations completely derailed on more than one occasion as one overenthusiastic professional joins that discussion. Small talk is a skill, and it is more present in some cultures than others, it has to be said. However, we are not here to discuss which is right and which is wrong. We are here because in English, it is such a vitally important concept that without it, business, or better said, any meaningful interaction, simply doesn't happen. Learning to make small talk is essential for all English language learners, but even more so for professionals. It is a part of the English-speaking culture. When it's not there, things just feel, really wrong. It breaks the ice between you and your audience, it helps develop a relationship with them, and it sets conditions for successful and meaningful communication, all of which is paramount when conducting business. For professionals, good small talk is your secret weapon when in any business scenario. But what do we say? How do we say it? When do we say it? And perhaps most importantly, what shouldn't we say? Fear not. On this episode of the Business English Podcast, we are going to answer these questions. We're going to talk about some do's and don'ts when conducting small talk, a few guidelines, if you will. We're also going to learn a few phrases to get that conversation rolling, even with complete strangers, and, of course, give you chance to practice them. But before we unleash this fantastic episode, let's cue the music. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business English Podcast, helping professionals communicate more effectively, more confidently, and with impact. With your host, Rob, from Energetic English. Let's get down to business. Now, as we have said, small talk is essentially your key to opening up brand new conversations and thus opportunities with complete strangers, business associates, or potential clients. It is so vital, in fact, that without it, you risk sounding rude or even confrontational, never mind trying to develop any sort of relationship. To help illustrate this point, allow me to use an analogy. I want you to imagine a conventional way of meeting a partner, somebody you hope to one day marry, for example. So, one day you are out for a walk, you're minding your own business, and then suddenly you see this person. You think, wow, this is a person that I really want to get to know and hopefully be together forever with. So you cross the street, walk right up to them, and ask them to marry you. I think we can all hazard a guess as to how this may turn out. Probably not well. They will more than likely be rather surprised, and you, will probably experience some sort of rejection to your initial offer. Let us consider an alternative scenario, one where we take a little more time to get to know the person, conventionally referred to as dating. We put ourselves in a position where you begin to learn more about this person in different contexts, developing a relationship over time. This scenario is far more common and arguably has a higher likelihood of some sort of success. I believe that most of us wish to be romanced, if you will, before actually committing to any serious relationship or engagement. And it is through the lens of that analogy that I would like you to think about small talk. Now, as the title of this episode suggests, we are going to focus on starting some small talk, which arguably is the trickiest bit. The first words out of your mouth to a complete stranger can be pretty important. Now, as we've mentioned on previous episodes, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. But before we go jumping into exactly what phrases to say and when to use them, we need to talk about a few guidelines. 4, in fact, some do's and don'ts. These will keep you on the straight and narrow as you take a leap of faith and begin conversing with a complete stranger. Right, let's start with a big one. This is a huge don't. Don't ever, for as long as there is breath in your body, start a piece of small talk using either of the following 2 subjects: politics or religion. Now, you might be thinking that is a fairly obvious thing to avoid, but you would be flabbergasted at the amount of times, even on networking events after seminars where I have taught networking and small talk techniques, professionals have approached me and immediately asked my opinion on Brexit. Now, clearly these subjects should be avoided due to their sensitivity and capacity for causing unintended offence. It's also worth mentioning that even subjects that would seem fairly benign for most could potentially flare tempers in certain environments. A very British example of this could be talking about certain football teams within certain rival areas of that city or district. This could result in your conversation going sideways fairly quickly. In many cases, if you're even asking the question whether the topic you're about to discuss is controversial or not, you're best off avoiding it completely. So, if it is so difficult to tell what could be considered controversial, is there any way of knowing what we can make small talk about? Well, yes, and that brings us on to our second guideline. Number 2. Do talk about anything that is a shared experience. But what do I mean here? I am referring to anything that is immediately present and obvious to both parties, both people involved in that conversation, the people that are partaking in that small talk. That is you and your audience. Topics like current weather, current temperature, current refreshments available, the speakers at the event you're attending, traffic, timetabling, session duration, key points of the seminar, literally anything where you share some sort of common ground with your audience. This is where it is safest to play, and this is where it is safest to begin your small talk. Okay, our third guideline. Don't just talk about you and your thoughts. Make sure that when you are conducting small talk, you open up the conversation so that the other person can speak and engage with you. There have been countless occasions during networking sessions where an individual attempting to make small talk has just introduced themselves and then told their audience or their partner what they think about the world before moving into their own product pitch. In this scenario, this does not help build any sort of relationship with a stranger, and perhaps more importantly, doesn't afford you any opportunity to learn about them. As I tell my clients, make sure you pass the microphone around. And our fourth and final guideline is do ask questions. Now, this is loosely related to our previous guideline of not dominating the small talk. Make sure you ask questions during your conversation. This will ensure not only that you don't just talk about yourself, but more importantly, it will allow you to learn more about the other individual and begin building a picture in your mind of who they are and what they are about. Additionally, a powerful byproduct of asking questions is that your audience feels more listened to, more cared for and understood. ultimately resulting in a stronger bond being built and highly effective small talk being undertaken. Just make sure you actually listen to their responses and be prepared to partake in the conversation, as potentially one of your questions gets thrown back at you for your opinion on the subject. Don't just wait for your turn to speak again. Okay, so they were the 4 guidelines to adhere to when starting small talk with someone. As a quick reminder, they were: 1. Don't talk about politics or religion, or indeed anything remotely sensitive. 2. Do talk about anything that is a shared experience. 3. Don't just talk about you and your thoughts. 4. Do ask questions. Right, with the guidelines in place to keep you on track, let's move on to some topics and phrases we can use when starting some small talk. Now, as we laid out in the guidelines, we should try to talk about shared experience as much as possible. Now, there are certain exceptions to this, but we will come on to that a bit later on. But first, let's look at 3 topics and certain phrases that could be considered shared experience at a business event, like a conference or a networking seminar. The first, and perhaps most common for, I think, the British, but professionals in general, is, of course, the weather. It is a clear shared experience and it is a neutral subject. So here are some small talk phrases that you can use to start up a conversation. Now, I'm going to say them twice, leaving a little gap at the end of each one, so you can repeat them back for clarity and practice. Okay, here we go. First one. I can't believe this weather, can you? I can't believe this weather, can you? We couldn't ask for better weather, could we? We couldn't ask for better weather, could we? This is a good day to be indoors, don't you think? This is a good day to be indoors, don't you think? Now, another topic for small talk which is closely linked to the weather is your current environment. For example, a couple of phrases which deal with shared experiences in your current environment could be: a bit chilly in here today, isn't it? I think they need to turn the heating up. A bit chilly in here today, isn't it? I think they need to turn the heating up. It's so busy here today. I never thought it was going to be this popular. It's so busy here today. I never thought it was going to be this popular. So what do you think of the venue? So what do you think of the venue? The coffee is nice and strong. Fancy a cup? The coffee is nice and strong. Fancy a cup? And finally, as we are oriented towards professional communication on this podcast, the final topic for initiating strong small talk is to talk about the event itself. So, for example, what did you think of the last speaker? What did you think of the last speaker? So what are your thoughts on the agenda for today? So what are your thoughts on the agenda for today? Is this the first time you've been to an event like this? Is this the first time you've been to an event like this? Has it been a good event for you so far? Has it been a good event for you so far? So there we have it. 3 topics that we can use within the category of shared experience: the weather, the environment, and the event, all neutral and all a very good starting point for small talk. Now, as I said earlier, there are certain exceptions for when you can use other topics for making small talk outside of shared experience. But I want to emphasize that these topics do push one level deeper into the audience's personal arena, and thus should really be a secondary or follow-up piece of communication, rather than a leading one. Some phrases for you on these sorts of topics could be, what did you think of the news today? What did you think of the news today? So, what are you going to do at the weekend? So, what are you going to do at the weekend? So, what did you get up to at the weekend? So, what did you get up to at the weekend? Any plans for after the event? Any plans for after the event? I love your suit or dress. Can I ask where you got it? I love your suit or dress. Can I ask where you got it? Have you worked here long? Have you worked here long? As you can see, the line of questioning to generate small talk is a little more personal and encroaches on things that your audience may not feel comfortable disclosing at first. They are, of course, on the whole, acceptable in the majority of cases, but just be mindful that there is a difference between our first group of topics and these ones we've just discussed. And there we have it. A crash course in how to small talk with absolutely anybody while still keeping on the right side of the conversation. Now, ensure you go back through this episode and make note and practice the pronunciation of these phrases so you can use them fluently next time you need them. But before we leave you, a quick recap on the key points from today's episode. The 4 guidelines were: don't talk about politics or religion, or anything sensitive for that matter. Do talk about anything that is shared experience. Don't just talk about you and your thoughts. And do ask questions. They are the 4 guidelines. And as we discussed, the safest shared experience topics were about the weather, the current environment, and the current venue. Now, this all lays groundwork for our next episode on keeping small talk going, where we discuss the tactics and techniques that allow us to maximize the value of our small talk interactions, ultimately building strong relations and networking ability. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on all this actionable advice, pronunciation practice, and of course, business English conversation. This has been the Business English Podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.